You've probably been told your entire life to just be nice, haven't you? Be gentle. Keep the peace. Don't stir the pot. But let me ask you this. How well has that worked on someone who is a narcissist? You see, narcissists don't interpret kindness as love. They interpret it as weakness. And here's the brutal truthing. Being nice won't change a narcissist. In fact, it feeds them. It fuels their delusion. It validates their manipulation. They see your silence not as maturity, but as surrender. They see your forgiveness not as grace, but as permission. And every time you back down, every time you let their coast slide in the name of peace, you lose a piece of yourself. This isn't just about relationships. This is about identity, integrity, and the war between truth and illusion. Narcissists are masters of confusion. They will gaslight you so well, you'll doubt your own eyes, your own memory, your own voice. But if you want to break free, truly free, you need more than kindness. You need courage. You need boundaries. You need clarity. You need the power of truth. And the most powerful truth you can realize is this: you are not responsible for healing someone who keeps hurting you. Read that again. You were likely raised to believe that kindness is the highest virtue. And in many ways, it is. Kindness is what softens the hard edges of the world. It bridges wounds. It creates understanding. It brings peace. But when kindness is extended to the wrong people, in the wrong context, it doesn't heal. It harms, not them. There is a quiet danger that comes with being nice, especially when it's performed as a way to keep chows at bay. You start saying eyes when you mean no. You smile when you feel broken. You keep the peace at the cost of your own sanity. You bite your tongue so hard that your soul starts to bleed. And somewhere along the way, you begin to forget that your feelings, your needs, your boundaries, they matter too. When you're dealing with a narcissist, this dangerous dynamic multiplies. They're not comforted by your kindness. They're empowered by it. To them, it's a signal, not of love, but of leverage. They begin to see your empathy as a tool they can use. Your willingness to forgive becomes a pathway to repeat their behavior. Your silence becomes a stage for their dominance. And before you realize it, your kindness, something once pure and noble, has become a weapon used against you. This doesn't happen all at once. It's slow, insidious. At first, you think you're being patient. You justify their behavior. They're hurting. They had a rough childhood. Maybe I misunderstood. But each time you excuse the manipulation, you give up a piece of your power. Each time you swallow your pain to keep the peace, you betray yourself. And eventually, you look in the mirror and don't recognize who you've become. Drained, confused, apologetic for simply existing. You tell yourself, if I just keep being good, they'll see how much I love them. But narcissists don't respond to love the way you do. They don't learn from your compassion. They exploit it because deep down, a narcissist doesn't want a partner. They want control. And the more they see you prioritizing their emotions over your own truth, the more they tighten their grip. And yet we stay. We endure. We perform emotional acrobatics just to hold it all together. Why? Because we were taught that walking away is cruel, that anger is wrong, that confrontation is dangerous. And for many of us, especially those raised in unstable homes, keeping the peace became a survival skill. We were trained to minimize ourselves so others wouldn't explode, to smooth things over quickly before cost swallowed everything. But that trauma response, so useful in the past, is now costing you your present. Let me tell you something hard, but freeing kindness without boundaries is not love. It's self-abandonment. Love does not mean allowing yourself to be mistreated. Compassion does not mean sacrificing your dignity. Patience does not mean tolerating abuse. At some point, you have to stop trying to prove your worth to someone who doesn't even see your value. At some point, the most loving thing you can do for them and for yourself is to draw the line, to say, no more. To say, you don't get to hurt me just because you're hurt. To say, I choose me. But drawing boundaries feels terrifying at first, especially when your identity has been built on being the good one. especially when the narcissist has convinced you that you're the problem, that you're selfish, that you're too sensitive, that your boundaries are a form of cruelty. They'll tell you that your distance is abandonment, that your silence is punishment, that your no is an act of war. But the truth is this: people who benefit from your lack of boundaries will always frame your boundaries as betrayal. Let them. Because real betrayal isn't when you say no to dysfunction. Real betrayal is when you say yes to pain over and over and over again, just to keep someone else comfortable. So here's what you need to know. You don't have to become hard or bitter. You don't have to stop being kind. But you do have to become clear. You do have to become strong. You do have to learn how to love yourself enough to stop allowing access to those who treat your softness as weakness. You are not cold for protecting your peace. You are not selfish for saying, I won't carry this anymore. You are not unloving for refusing to be someone else's emotional dumping ground. Your kindness should flow from overflow, not depletion. It should come from a place of wholeness, not fear. If someone only responds to you when you're breaking yourself and have to meet their needs, that's not connection. That's exploitation. So be kind. But be wise. Be gentle. But be grounded. Be loving. But be firm. Because the version of you that's constantly shrinking, apologizing, adjusting, and hoping, they're never going to wake up and appreciate that version of you. In fact, the longer you stay in that performance, the more invisible you become. And you weren't born to be invisible. You were born to be seen, respected, and honored, not just by others, but by yourself. And that begins the moment you stop equating kindness with permission and start treating your boundaries as sacred. You're not bad for finally saying no. You're just done betraying yourself to say yes. And that's not weakness. That's strength. That's clarity. That's freedom. There's a heartbreaking realization that comes after months, sometimes years, of trying to love someone who seems emotionally unavailable, unpredictable, and unapologetically self-centered. You try everything: kindness, patience, silence, compromise, even sacrifice. But nothing seems to make them care. Nothing makes them soften. Nothing reaches that part of them you're desperately trying to connect with. And at some point, the weight of it all settles in your chest like a stone. They don't actually want love. They want control. It's one of the most painful truths to accept, because you came into this connection with your heart open. You thought if you just gave enough, showed enough, forgave enough, they would eventually mirror back the same depth. But what you didn't realize is that narcissists don't play by the rules of emotional reciprocity. What they crave isn't intimacy. It's power. What they seek isn't unity, it's dominance. And love in their hands becomes a currency, a transaction, a performance, a tool. They don't bond. They bind. They don't see love as something to nurture, but something to leverage. And once you're emotionally invested, once you've let your guard down and shown them your most vulnerable parts, that's when the real manipulation begins. At first, they charm you. They mirror you. They say everything you've been waiting to hear. You feel seen, chosen, even special. But slowly, subtly, the tone shifts. You begin to notice how often your words are twisted, how often your boundaries are crossed, how often you're walking on eggshells to avoid triggering them. And the tragedy is you blame yourself. You think maybe you're not doing enough. Maybe they're still healing. Maybe your love is the one thing that can change them. So you try harder. You lower your standards. You silence your intuition. You give and give while they take and take. But no matter how much you offer, it never fills them, because narcissists aren't trying to build a connection. They're trying to construct control. Control over your emotions, control over your decisions, control over how you see yourself. And once they sense they've gained that influence, the mask begins to slip. They stop pretending. The warmth vanishes. And the same person who once made you feel like you were everything begins to treat you like you're nothing. But the manipulation is so calculated, so confusing, that you stay. Not because you're weak, but because they've made you believe you can't do better, that no one else will love you, that they're the best you'll ever have. This is not love. This is psychological warfare dressed in romance. True love isn't about possession. It's about presence. It's not about control. It's about connection. It doesn't demand silence. It encourages expression. But narcissists, in their deep insecurity, can't tolerate true intimacy, because intimacy requires vulnerability, and vulnerability threatens their false image. So instead, they dominate, they gaslight, they punish, they confuse, and they do it all while insisting they love you. But love doesn't feel like fear. Love doesn't feel like anxiety. Love doesn't leave you questioning your worth every other day. That's not love. That's trauma bonding. And here's what makes it so dangerous. A narcissist often do just enough to keep you hoping. A few kind words after a week of stonewalling. A sudden affectionate gesture after days of criticism. A moment of vulnerability after months of emotional distance. They give you crumbs because they know it's enough to keep you starving. And when you're starved for validation, you'll chase their approval like oxygen. But you have to understand, this is not about love. This is about control. And the only way to truly disrupt the control is not through more compassion or explanation. It's through clarity, through truth, through boundaries that are no longer negotiable. You can't heal someone who weaponizes their pain. You can't teach someone who refuses to be wrong. And you can't connect with someone who only sees relationships as mirrors of their ego. Narcissists are not looking for equals. They are looking for followers, for extensions of themselves. And the moment you step outside the role they've assigned you, the moment you start thinking for yourself, questioning their behavior, reclaiming your power, they will retaliate. Not because you hurt them, but because you disobeyed them. And that's how you know this was never about love. When you set a boundary and they punish you. When you ask for respect and they ridicule you. When you speak your truth and they call you selfish. That's not love. That's control. That's insecurity in disguise. But the truth is, real love does not demand that you shrink to make someone else feel big. Real love doesn't guilt trip you into compliance. Real love doesn't hurt and then tell you it's your fault for feeling pain. So let me say it again. You can't love a narcissist into wholeness because they don't want healing. They want hierarchy. They don't want your heart. They want your surrender. They don't want a partner. They want a puppet. And the only way to break free is to stop trying to be enough for someone who was never looking for love in the first place. The power you're hoping to find in their approval, it's already inside you. The validation you're desperate for, you were meant to give that to yourself. Not through pride, but through truth. Not through ego, but through worth. Because the moment you realize that love without respect is manipulation, you stop chasing, you stop explaining, and you start reclaiming your time, your energy, your soul. That's not selfish. That's sacred. There comes a point in your healing journey when you begin to realize something uncomfortable, but necessary. Some people never intended to understand you. Not because you were unclear, not because your emotions were invalid, but because understanding you would require them to confront who they are. And they're not ready for that. When you're dealing with a narcissist, this becomes painfully obvious. You explain your side. You break it down with empathy. You share your feelings with trembling honesty, hoping they'll finally get it, hoping that your transparency will pierce the armor around their heart. But they don't get it. Not because they can't, but because they won't. They're not listening to understand. They're listening to defend. They're listening to prepare their counterattack. They're listening only to find the next angle to turn the blame back on you. And yet you keep trying because you believe that if you can just find the right words, if you can just express yourself in a way that's calm enough, respectful enough, loving enough, they'll finally see your side. You think if you show your wounds gently enough, they'll stop inflicting them. But narcissists don't operate within the same emotional reality. They are not looking to connect. They're looking to maintain control. They distort, deflect, and deny, not because they're confused, but because they benefit from your confusion. Every time you explain yourself to someone who is committed to misunderstanding you, you lose a piece of yourself. You hand over your clarity to someone who intends to dismantle it. And in doing so, you start to question your own reality. Maybe I overacted. Maybe I didn't say it right. Maybe it is my fault. That spiral is exactly where they want you. Because as long as you're explaining, defending, or apologizing for simply having emotions, you're still playing the role they assigned you, the one where they hold the truth, and you're just lucky they're still entertaining your perspective. But here's the truth no one tells you. You don't owe anyone an explanation for your boundaries, your values, or your truth, especially not to someone who continuously weaponizes your words. Think about it. How many times have you walked away from a conversation with them feeling more confused than when you started? How often have you rehearsed your words, trying to avoid setting them off, only to be accused of overthinking, overreacting, or being too sensitive? That's not a communication problem. That's a manipulation pattern. The more you speak, the more ammunition they collect. The more honest you are, the more they twist your words. The more vulnerable you become, the more they exploit your openness. And every time you go back into the ring to explain yourself one more time, you're not gaining ground. You're reliving the same emotional war that was never meant to be won. So what do? You stop. You stop explaining yourself to someone who has already decided that your feelings are inconvenient. You stop looking for validation from a gain's power by keeping you insecure. You stop hoping they'll change when all they've shown you is a commitment to their own comfort at the cost of your peace. This isn't about giving up. This is about waking up. Because when you stop explaining, something powerful happens. You take your power back. You begin to realize that not everyone deserves access to your heart, that your truth doesn't require approval to be real, that your emotions don't need to be defended to be valid. There is a quiet strength in saying nothing when someone expects you to beg. There is dignity in walking away from a conversation that was never about understanding in the first place. There is freedom in knowing you don't have to justify your boundaries, your intuition, or your healing. The narcissist will notice. They'll push harder. They'll accuse you of being distant, rude, or emotionally closed off. But that's just their desperation speaking. Because the moment you stop explaining, they lose control of the narrative. And control is what this was always about. You are not difficult. You are not dramatic. You are not crazy. You are waking up to a pattern that has kept you trapped for far too long. A pattern where you thought love meant proving your point. A pattern where you confused connection with convincing. A pattern where you believed that if you could just be understood, you'd finally be loved. But love doesn't require endless explanations. Real love seeks to understand, not to win. Real love listens to feel, not to argue. Real love holds space, not power. So let go of the need to be understood by someone who thrives on your confusion. Let go of the hope that they'll finally get it if you just try harder. Let go of the cycle that has taught you to trade your peace for their approval. You don't have to explain your pain to the person who caused it. You don't have to justify your growth to the person who fears it. You're allowed to protect your energy. You're allowed to speak your truth once and be done. You're allowed to walk away when the conversation is no longer about healing, but control. And most of all, you're allowed to be free. Not when they understand you, but when you understand you. There's a turning point in every toxic dynamic, a moment that doesn't come with fireworks or loud declarations, but with a quiet decision deep in your soul. It's the moment you finally say to yourself, not of anger, not out of revenge, but out of pure clarity, I deserve better than this. That's when everything changes. Because narcissists don't fear your rage. They don't flinch at your tears. They don't care when you beg or plead. In fact, those reactions feed their illusion of importance. They thrive on your emotional choice because it keeps you orbiting around their control. But what they can't handle, what truly shakes their foundation, is when you stop needing their approval, when you stop arguing, when you stop explaining, when you stop caring about their version of the story and start focusing on something far more powerful, your self-respect. See, narcissists manipulate by convincing you that your worth is tied to how well you please them. They plant seeds of doubt, then water them with guilt. They twist your confidence until you can't tell the difference between their voice and your own. They make you think that if you were just a little more patient, a little less emotional, a little more agreeable, then maybe, just maybe, they'd stop hurting you. But they won't. Not because you're not enough, but because it was never about you. It was always about control. And the moment you reclaim that control by deciding to respect yourself, even in silence, is the moment you break their illusion, because narcissists don't actually know how to relate to someone who knows their own value, someone who doesn't flinch under pressure, someone who doesn't beg to be chosen. They are used to manipulation working. They are used to shame controlling you. They are used to your empathy keeping you tethered. But self-respect, that's foreign to them. That's terrifying. Because when you truly respect yourself, you stop waiting for them to change. You stop hoping for a breakthrough. You stop participating in the cycle that left you empty. You start seeing patterns for what they are, not as personal failures, but as emotional traps you no longer have to walk into. And that's the beginning of your freedom. Self-respect isn't loud. It doesn't need to prove itself. It doesn't scream or explain. It simply walks away from what no longer serves it. It says, I don't need you to agree with me to know I'm right. I don't need your validation to feel whole. I don't need to fix you to feel enough. That level of inner clarity scares narcissists because it means they can no longer play the role of puppet master in your life. It means their words don't cut you the same way. It means their silence doesn't control your mood. It means you've remembered your worth. And that's the one thing they were trying to keep you from. Because a person with self-respect cannot be manipulated long term. They may be fooled for a while, but once they see the pattern, they don't beg for closure. They become the closure. You'll know you're walking in that self-respect when you no longer feel the urge to retaliate or explain yourself. When you can look at the chaos and say, I don't have to fix this. I just have to remove myself from it. That's not indifference. That's healing. That's not coldness. That's wisdom. Because you begin to realize that your peace is more valuable than their approval. That your mental health is more important than their comfort. That your future is more important than proving a point in a battle they never intended to fight fairly. The greatest power you'll ever reclaim is the decision to honor yourself, even when it means letting go of people you once loved. Even when it means walking through grief, confusion, and silence. Even when it means disappointing others who benefited from your lack of boundaries. Because on the other side of that discomfort is something priceless. Freedom. Freedom to think clearly. Freedom to feel safely. Freedom to speak honestly. Freedom to live as your full self. Not the version someone tried to shrink you into. And as you walk in that self-respect, you'll notice something beautiful happens. The chaos quiets, the confusion fades, the fog lifts, and the voice that once whispered, maybe it's my fault, becomes a roar that says, I choose me now. You were never too much. You were never the problem. You were just in a space that could not hold your light. So hold it for yourself, because the love you were trying so hard to give away is the love you now owe to your own soul. The energy you poured into changing someone else is the energy you now redirect into rebuilding your sense of self. And when you do that, when you make that shift, no narcissist, no manipulator, no gaslighter can ever touch you the same way again. Not because they stopped trying, but because you stopped participating. That's what real power looks like. Not domination, not control, But peace, truth, self-respect. That's the force that truly changes your life. Not being nicer, not holding on tighter, but finally realizing you were never meant to shrink for someone who refused to grow. And when you rise in that knowing, you don't just break free. So now you know. You being nice won't change a narcissist. Explaining yourself won't make them see you. Lowering your standards won't invite their respect. The power you've been searching for isn't found in their approval. It's found in your clarity, your boundaries, and your self-respect. You don't need to yell. You don't need to fight. You don't need to beg them to understand you. All you need is the courage to stand in your truth, even if your voice shakes. So if you're watching this and something inside you is stirring, if you're tired of being misunderstood, manipulated, and minimized, then this is your moment. Not tomorrow, not next week. Now, start choosing yourself, not out of bitterness, but out of love. Start protecting your peace, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. Start building a life where your voice is heard, your boundaries are honored, and your soul is safe. You don't owe anyone your silence. You don't owe anyone your suffering, but you do owe yourself freedom. Walk away if you have to. Cut ties if you must. Rebuild from zero if it means regaining your wholeness, because you are not here to survive under someone else's control. You are here to rise. And if this message spoke to you, don't just feel it. Act on it. Subscribe for more truth like this. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And comment below, I co-see myself. Let the healing begin with a declaration. You're not alone. You're not crazy. You're just waking up. And once you wake up, you never go back. The cycle ends with you. And the freedom, that starts today.